Hello, everybody, again, and welcome to Tanya in Real Life. We're going to be doing Perek Yud Gimel today. But before we start, I feel like I want to address, even just for one moment, the terrible, unspeakable tragedy that's on our hearts. And a few people asked me if we could talk about it, but really, I honestly have nothing to say. It's just tremendously painful. I know that there's so much noise, so many people are sharing their thoughts and perspectives on, how do we process. Personally, I really have nothing to add to anything that anyone has said. I feel that, a lot of people are very tremendously pained and we're looking for relief, but really it's like we're still in the Shiva. We're supposed to be feeling pained. And if you're feeling very broken about it and you can't wrap your head around it and you wake up in the morning and it's just so you feel a certain heaviness, I think you're normal. I think that this is a terrible blow to each of us personally as part of the Jewish people. They're the one thing that in my mind, I keep saying, okay, Shterna, what would my father say? I keep thinking, what would I ask him? What would he say? And I feel like he would just look at me and say, he doesn't know. And we don't know. We don't understand Hashem's ways. And that's really the only answer. The only answer is that there is no answer. There's nothing that we could say to make it better. If we would, then we would kind of be justifying it. We do know, though, that Mashiach will come and he will answer all the questions. We also know that Hashem never told us that, we don't have a guarantee that there will be no pain in the world. We never had that. We don't have any arrangements with Hashem that he has to follow certain rules about how Mashiach is supposed to come and what is exactly supposed to happen. We obviously hope for the best. We believe in the best. And that's why we're having such a hard time when things are not the best from our experience. And, but that is an aberration of what is normal. It's not normal. And there's nothing that we could say or do to normalize it. So I just want to acknowledge that the pain is in this room. It's in our hearts. We can't make it go away. Mashiach is the only one who will make it go away. And I also feel that we shouldn't forget this pain and we should be part of the solution. And nobody should surrender to despair, because whenever there's intense emotions, the Yetzer Horah comes into the room and tries to get a hold on, oh, here's where I'm going to come in and make a mess. And whether the emotions are intense joy, the Yetzer Horah will find a way to distract us. And sometimes it's also when there's intense pain. The Yetzer Horah will turn that pain into despair. There's a lot of room for pain, but there's no room, not even an inch, for despair. Because no matter what, we still trust, we believe, we know with certainty that Mashiach is coming. Mashiach is coming very soon. We are already in the process of Geula. There's no turning back. We are in active labor. This is happening. Hashem should make it only good, only revealed good from here on. And so there's plenty of room for pain. There's plenty of room for sadness and for a broken heart, and not 1 inch for despair. What do we do with the energy of our pain? Instead of letting it go, bring us down, let's use that energy. If we care, that energy has to be translated into action, directed to bring Mashiach closer. Every ounce of energy, every ounce of caring, we can be part of the solution called Geula. And despair is chas v'shalom part of the problem called Galus. So let's not surrender to despair. Let's be strong. From the time of Miriam Hanaviah, when she predicted a child was born and he's going to be Mashiach Shel Yisrael, he's going to be the Mashiach, he's going to take us out of Galus. Moshe Rabbeinu, from that day when she predicted it till the Jewish people actually began the process of Geula was 80 years. Okay, and terrible torture and suffering and death and destruction and devastating pain during that time, we should not have to wait 80 years. Chas v'shalom, chas v'chalila. I'm just making that comparison to say that, you know what? We don't have a number on what this process is. We believe that it's happening now. Every action that we do makes it happen a drop sooner. And that's all, and that's all we could do. I know that that doesn't take away the pain. I do hope it takes away the despair and gives a little bit of perspective. Somebody's asking a question. Last week, we spoke about how having anxiety is not an indication of lack of emunah. Does that apply to anger too? Yes, thank you so much for mentioning it. If you're broken and you feel a tendency to be pulled into despair, or we even feel angry and frustrated by the process of Golus, and we cannot put our feet down in this reality where in this world where such a terrible tragedy happened, that's not a lack of emunah. On the contrary, that's an expression of emunah. That means I trust Hashem that everything will be revealed good. I trust that Mashiach is coming now. I am therefore frustrated, disappointed, sad, brokenhearted that it did not happen. And that's such a beautiful, happy day in the holy space of Meron, with on the Rashbi's day of joy should be transformed into a day of terrible, heartbreaking tragedy. It's not to have pain about that, to have frustration and to be brokenhearted about that is not a lack of emunah at all. Where emunah comes into play is, where do our emotions take us? Where does our pain take us? Right? Emunah helps us not get into despair. Emunah reminds us that though we have pain and though we have questions and though we have terrible, terrible frustration and deep, deep, profound disappointment in what's happening, right? In the unfolding of events, that is in no way going to take away from our faith. That's in no way going to take away from our work, from our commitment, from our devotion, from our full-fledged belief that we are walking towards Geula with Hashem right at our side, with our loving Hashem, and that Hashem is crying with us. The Rashbi was crying with us on that day. It wasn't like he's up here and we're down here watching us in our pain. No, Hashem is right here with us, and experiencing it right alongside us and giving us the strength to take the next step forward towards Geula. So let's jump into chapter 13 of Tanya, because our learning is actually part of the solution. Our learning is part of, I was thinking, like, how can we talk about Tanya? We should just talk about this, but really talking about Tanya and giving ourselves the strength that from the Baal Tanya is literally part of how we are walking into Geula. And with that, we're not just bringing light into our own lives, we're really bringing light into the world at large and comfort into the world at large. So let's jump into chapter 13. Okay, so in chapter 13, we continue talking about a Beinoni. A Beinoni is someone who has that inner struggle. The animal self puts up a very, very strong, powerful fight. Within a Beinoni's heart and mind, the animal self, the Yetzer Horah, the ego, is very active and alert and forceful, compelling. It's constantly bombarding us with triggers, with a tendency towards all kinds of moods, impulses, interests, emotions, pursuits, all stemming from the mindset of I am here in this world by myself, with myself, for myself. And yet, a Beinoni, gets 100 invitations a day, maybe more than 100. I don't know the count. I get certainly more than 100 invitations a day to play with my ego, to play with my nefesh habahamis, to play with my Yetzer Horah, but we try not to act on these invitations. A Beinoni is someone who never acts on these invitations. A Beinoni is somebody who stays committed to let the neshama show up in every single behavior, every time, in everything we do, in everything we say and even in our conscious thoughts. So, and it all begins with V'lai nikra lav shem Rasha afilu rega echad. Like we said, a Beinani says, I will never be called a Rasha. I will never do anything that will ignore or distract me from my absolute commitment to Hashem. I will always be a carrier, a reflector of Hashem's light. So in creating Beinani moments, how can we find the courage to resist the kingship of our animal self, despite its forceful pull, despite its forceful impact? How do we find the strength to keep showing up with our neshama shining forth? And we said that a Beinani's biggest strength comes from davening with focus and intention. When we daven and we think about the words we're saying, davening is an opportune time for acquiring a state of moichen de gadlus. It's a time of moichen de gadlus upstairs. And it's a shas hakosher. It's an opportune time for us to achieve a state of moichen de gadlus, a place where our mind appreciates with clarity the truth of Hashem, and we value Hashem. And with that, we make a strong commitment to stay true to to stay true to Hashem and to stay aligned with Hashem's reality throughout the day. While davening, the Nefesh HaBahamis is out to lunch. It's not going to bother the Beinani in the same way that once the Beinani achieves that state of awareness and focus and intention. But after davening, the Nefesh HaBahamis wakes up refreshed, recharged, ready to go, ready to play, and reactivated. And it starts sending those invitations, shooting up those motivations, those to our system, bombarding us with all kinds of, those tendencies and impulses and moods and behaviors that don't allow our neshama to shine forth in the way that we would want to. And then how does the Beinani stay strong and connected? Because mayach shalat al halev. How does the Beinani stay strong and aware? Because we're always connected, right? The fact, mayach shalat al halev, our mind is the boss of our behavior, not our hearts. Our hearts could be triggered, but nothing happens in our body unless our mind gives it permission to happen. And this is not to happen. This is not a skill. This is not a strategy. This is not something we have to practice. It's a fact, a scientific fact of human nature that human nature is such that we cannot engage in any action unless our mind gives us permission to do that action. And that's what we learned about in Perek Yud Beis in chapter 12, that if we make this commitment in our minds, then with the willpower of our minds, with that commitment in our minds, we can control our behaviors. And what do we actually do to control ourselves? We turn on the light of our neshama. We do a different behavior, a positive behavior, a meaningful behavior, a behavior that reflects our awareness of Hashem, by Hashem, with Hashem, for Hashem, a behavior that reflects our awareness of our true self, that we are a carrier of Hashem's light, and that automatically puts us, it has that power of light. Our neshama has the power of light. And so the minute we do that, we are automatically in a position of greater strength and awareness of Hashem in our lives. Now, all of that was Perek Yud Beis. We also spoke a lot about, last week, we spoke about how that stretches itself to our resentments and our grudges, and how we can let go of, we can stop giving people power to hurt us by really, with continued resentment, because that's, after all, what resentment is. We're giving people power to continue hurting us long after they actually hurt us the first time, and the second time, and the third time, however many times it was. Resentment is giving permission to people to continue hurting us. When we say nobody has power over me, only Hashem has power over me, when we really, that's how it stretches also to our human relationships, by really recognizing that nobody has anything on us. Our only power is Hashem. We don't have to please anyone but Hashem. In other words, we're allowed to please people, but not in a way that contradicts or overrides or ignores our overriding commitment to please Hashem. Okay, so now all that was Perek Yud Beis, and now in Perek Yud Gimel, we are firstly going to answer a question that we had all the way in the beginning of the Tanya right in the beginning of Parak Aleph, and that was, what is a Beinani, right? The Gemorrah says that a Beinani is someone who zev v'zeh shoften, this one and that one dominate. The Yetzer Horah and the Yetzer Tov are both judges. And what does that mean? Until now, we thought, before learning Tanya, we thought that zev v'zeh shoften means that sometimes a Beinani is an average person. Sometimes the Beinani does everything right, and sometimes the Beinani does everything wrong. And that's what makes the Beinani an average. Sometimes the Beinani does mitzvahs, sometimes the Beinani does avera. Sometimes the Beinani is in ego mode, and sometimes the Beinani is in, bittul mode, Hashem, by Hashem, with Hashem, for Hashem mode. But we just learned that a Beinani is totally aware of Hashem's truth all the time and in every behavior. So a Beinani never does anything that ignores Hashem's presence or Hashem's truth, never does any avera. So how does that reconcile with the words of the Gemorrah? And we're going to answer this question briefly, and then we'll move on to a whole different, super fascinating discussion. Okay, so first we'll jump into the text. This week I put the text into the notes, whatever, like we did in the past. If you are listening to this, you can get the notes by emailing info@energizedliving.org. You can also, the text is in the Tanya. We're starting from the beginning of the parak. Uvazeh yuvan lashain maimer rabbeinu zechron levacha beinanim zev v'zeh shoftem. In the Gemorrah brachas, it says that what's a Beinani? A Beinani is someone zev v'zeh shoftem. This one and that one. Perish Yetzer Tov v'Yetzer Horah. Both of them are judges. And now we can understand, now with the understanding of what a Beinani is, based on chapter 12, what we just learned, now we understand the language used by the Gemorrah. A Beinani is someone in whom this one and that one, both the Yetzer Horah and the Yetzer Tov, are both judges. Dichsiv, it says in Tehillim, Ki yamoid liyamin evyon, lahishia mishoftei nafshay. Hashem stands at the right side of a poor person to save him from the judges of his soul. The Yetzer Horah in this pasuk in Tehillim is referred to as a judge, and that's why the Gemorrah refers to the Yetzer Horah as a judge. They didn't use the word, the Tehillim and the Gemorrah doesn't use the word king, ruler, dominating power, chas v'shalom. Because as soon as there is dominance and rulership of the Yetzer Horah on the small city, afilu l'sha'a kala, even for just a short while, nikra rasha ba'is hasha. As soon as the Yetzer Horah has a measure of dominance and control in the small city is a mashal, it's an analogy to our conscious behavior, our bodies, our thoughts, our conscious thought, our speech, and our behavior. Even for a short while, if the Yetzer Horah has dominance in our small city, in our behavior, even for a short time, we are called a rasha within that time. We are concealing Hashem's truth. We're ignoring or denying Hashem's truth within that time. And that's not a Beinani. So what is a Beinani? What's the Yetzer Horah? What's the relationship? So if the relationship between a Yetzer Horah and a Beinani is not one of dominance, what is the relationship? Ela ha-Yetzer Horah einay rak al derech mashal k'may shofet v'dayan ha'omer daitay b'mishpat va'af al pikein yachal liyos shelo yeh psak halacha kach l'maisa. The Yetzer Horah is nothing but like a judge who says his opinion in the court case, and nevertheless, it's possible that his opinion will not be the actual ruling. In short, when the Gemorrah describes the relationship between the Yetzer Horah and the Beinani, the Gemorrah uses the word judge and not a king. And this word is also used in Tehillim. And the meaning of this difference is that a judge's voice, when there's a big court case, the judge's voice is never the final ruling. A judge does not have control of the verdict. A king does have control of the verdict. When our Yetzer Horah is our king, when we obey the Yetzer Horah, we're not a Beinani within that moment. As soon as the Yetzer Horah is a king, we're not a Beinani anymore, because that means we're obeying. We have surrendered to our ego. We have surrendered to an obstruction of Hashem's truth in this world. And with that, within that moment, that's not called the Beinoni. That's the definition of a Rasha. So here's a little thought on that. You know, the Baal Tanya is teaching us, he's pointing out, he's saying, notice the specific use of the word judge and not king. And with this, the Baal Tanya is teaching us that our Yetzer Horah does not have actual control over our behavior. It's only a voice. It's only an opinion. It's only a calling, right? It doesn't have that authoritative ruling. It's not gonna have the verdict. And that's what the Baal Tanya is telling us, to notice the difference between judge and king. And my own thought on this is that, you know what, if we're calling the voice by a name, let's just realize and let's recognize, and it's so validating to recognize that if we're calling it a judge, that's very forceful. That's very authoritative. That is not a gentle and friendly, soft, sweet voice. It's a judge. Okay. You know, there are some people who'll give you an opinion, right? And they'll say, maybe you should do this. Maybe it might be a good idea. There's other opinions. I'm not saying what you should do, but you might want to consider doing this, or you might want to consider doing that. Maybe you want to think about it this way. Maybe you want to think about it. I know there's other ways to think about it, but maybe you want to, that's like a humble, sweet, friendly, supportive, encouraging voice. And then there's a different kind of person who says, no, this is it. And that's final. It's my way. I'm telling you this, you should know, this is how it is. And there's nothing else to it. Okay. That is not a very friendly, gentle, sweet voice that leaves room for doubt, for conversation, for discussion, for analysis, for negotiation. No, a judge's voice is very authoritative. It doesn't leave room for negotiating. And that's very different, right? A friend will have a very sweet, supportive, thoughtful way of talking. And the judge's voice is definitive, it's controlling, it's compelling. And that's what our animal self is called. And it's interesting to notice this because that's how we experience it. When you have this idea in your mind that maybe you're worthless, your nefesh habahamis, your animal self, your ego, your Yetzer Horah doesn't come and say, by the way, my dear friend, maybe, I know that there's other ways of looking at this, but maybe you're also worthless. No. That's not what the Yetzer Horah says. It says you're worthless. And when we're faced with a tragedy like the one in Miron just a few days ago, the Yetzer Horah doesn't come and say, maybe, I'm not so sure. How should we process this? The Yetzer Horah says despair, destruction, devastation, get into a bad mood, get into a mode of despair, get into the pit of inaction, resign to the problem called gullus. You're never getting out of here. Right? And it doesn't leave room for negotiation. It doesn't leave room for light. It shrouds us in certainty, in darkness, without leaving a crack open for light. And that's how we experience our Yetzer Horah. So I love that the Baal Tanya points out that we should recognize that the voice of our Yetzer Horah, or voice of our nefesh habahamis, is a judge. Why? Because when we experience very intense emotions or very intense compulsions, we might think, hey, something's wrong with me. I'm not a regular person. None of the regular tools are going to be helpful for me because I'm an exception to the rule. I'm having very intense emotions. This is not normal. I'm a different category of a human being. Okay. And I just want to say one thing because I'm going in a certain direction here. I want to just be clear that there are times when our emotions are really too intense for us. There are times when we really do need outside help to help ourselves ground ourselves in a healthier mindset, in a healthier reality, in just in a healthier, stronger, more secure space. And that's that's beyond what we're going to be learning here, what we're learning here in Tanya, okay? That's, we might need additional support that's beyond what we're learning here. But with these words, what the Baal Tanya is telling us is that even when we have very intense, very compelling, very authoritative, overwhelming emotions and pulls and compulsions and tendency, we are still very healthy, very normal. There's nothing wrong with us. We're not an exception to the rules and to the tools that the Tanya is offering us. We're exactly as we are designed to be. We fit right into this, this person called Beinani, okay? A Beinani is someone, yes, you have a judge inside of you, not a little friend, not a cute little puppy, a judge, an authoritative, compelling, forceful voice that and that urges you towards shame, ego, resentment, grudges, anxiety, despair, self-pity, and all the other stuff that we know too well. And if these tendencies and these feelings are very compelling, we are having a very ordinary, normal, animal self experience, okay? And still, even when, and it's also important to remember what the Baal Tanya is telling us here is that still, even when it feels like a judge and it feels so strong and compelling, let's remember that it's not our king. We do not have to obey it. It has nothing on us. We don't have to surrender to it. We don't have to resign to it. We don't have to do as it says. We don't have to act on our despair or our resentment or our worthlessness. We don't even have to entertain those thoughts. We could let it go. We can totally dismiss them because they are not, it's not our king. It's not coming from our king. We're not compelled to obey it. Okay, now in the next few lines of Tanya, we're going to answer an important question that's been coming up, and I've been speaking about this for a while. And the question is, sometimes we really want to change and we feel unable to. Sometimes we really want to do something, or we really want to stop doing something and we keep failing. We try and we keep failing. Why do we fail? And what can we do about it? What can we do about it? And it feels in these situations like Moyach Shalat Ala Leiv is not working because I tell myself, I'm not giving myself permission in my mind to overeat, let's say, but then I overeat. So why is this system not working for me? When I was learning these prakim in these chapters in the Tanya, I learned something from the recordings of Rabbi Yoel Khan. Rabbi Yoel Khan is a master teacher. He teaches in Yiddish. His recordings are on Chassidus.com, and he should be gesund for many long, healthy, happy years together with his wife, Shetalita. But learning these shiurim gave me so much clarity, and I feel like, and that's why I'm mentioning it, because I feel like it would be impossible to understand these chapters without this insight, and I didn't hear this insight in the other recordings and svarim that I looked into. Rabbi Yoel Khan said that chapter 12 is talking about one kind of Beinani, and chapter 13, Perek Yud Gimel, is talking about a different kind of Beinani. In the beginning of chapter 13, we're talking about a weaker Beinani. At the end of chapter 13, we're talking about a stronger Beinani. Now, every Beinani has one thing in common. A Beinani shows up with the behavior, with the neshama shining forth in the behavior. The Beinani lets the neshama be the king. But within the Beinani, there's different types of struggles. There are different levels of strength within the intensity within those struggles. And my own thought about this is that within the Beinani, we could extend this idea and say, within our own world, in our own efforts to show up as a Beinani, in some areas of our lives, the struggle is going to be easier. And in some areas of our lives, in some behaviors, in some tendencies, in some habits, the struggle is going to be so much more intense. And why? Why? Let's understand why the struggle is more intense. And with that, we'll understand, with that, we'll be able to, we'll dive into the words of the Tanya and hear what the Baal Tanya tells us about what to do about it. So last week we talked about the easier path. We said that a Beinani davens, gets clarity in his mind, Meichen the godless, perfect, absolute clarity. Hashem is true, ein oid movadoi. This is what my life is about. This is what matters in this world. This is who I am. This is what it's about. And therefore, from the place of clarity in his mind, the behavior naturally follows. And in this kind of Beinani, or for ourselves, in this Beinani kind of experience, in this Beinani world, in this Beinani behavior, our heart gets triggered, but our mind is perfectly clear. I'm not going to eat on Yom Kippur, okay? I'm not doing this. I'm not pulling the trigger on another person. I'm not going to punch them in their face. I'm not doing that. I'm not going there. I'm not even thinking about punching them in their face. Okay, that there are certain behaviors that is just so absolutely clear. It's an easy struggle. Even if I feel hungry on Yom Kippur, I'm not eating. I'm not even entertaining thoughts about eating. And in those areas, my behavior is absolutely aligned with my neshama. I am a Beinani, and it's easy. That's an easy Beinani experience because it's unthinkable in my mind. So it's going to be unthinkable, impossible in my behavior. But today we're meeting a different kind of Beinani, okay? A different kind of Beinani experience. What happens if our mind is conflicted? What happens if our mind is unclear, if our mind is uncertain? This is where most of us are at. And we're uncertain. And I'm going to say this, where most of us are at. Why? Because we have so many layers of our mind, so many layers of our consciousness, that maybe even when our conscious mind has absolute clarity about something, our subconscious mind is conflicted and confused and may even be actually holding on to an opposite belief and an opposite idea. We have many layers of beliefs that contradict our desired beliefs. And this is a whole different kind of struggle. It's not just that our hearts are triggered and our minds are unclear. The struggle is in our minds. And that's where the trouble is at. So let's put this into the language that the Tanya uses to describe our inner struggle. And by the way, that's why when Rabbi Yoel Khan is teaching this on his recording, he points out the language in the Perek Yud Beis is different from the language in Perek Yud Gimel, where when in Perek Yud Beis, when the Baal Tanya is describing the challenge, the Baal Tanya says, Mayach shalat al halev, right? The heart has a desire, but Mayach shalat al halev. In chapter 13, in Perek Yud Gimel, the Baal Tanya says, the heart has a desire, umei halev oila l'mayach, and from the heart it goes up to its mind. It goes up to the person's mind, and that's where the challenge is. So the struggle is no longer just in the heart. The struggle is already in the mind. And let's put this struggle into the language that the Baal Tanya told us in terms of the battle between the animal self and the godly self, between the nefesh habahamis and the nefesh elikis. Right? The Baal Tanya said, imagine there's a war between two kings. Okay, now each king has a home base. Each king has their home territory, their home country, their home land, where their palace is, right? And there's a war between the two kings. Where is the war happening? Where's the war happening? The minute, right, if America is at war with a different country and the war is taking place on a different land, the actual combat, the fight is happening miles away from America. That's one level of struggle. It's a whole different struggle when the actual fight, the chas v'shalom, the bombs are landing on American soil. Okay, troops are engaged in battle on American soil. That's a whole different level of battle. That means the enemy, chas v'shalom, has already infiltrated our space, our home base, our private domain. And if we translate that to the nefesh habahamis and the nefesh elikis, the home base of the nefesh elikis, the home base of our neshama is the mind. The home base of the animal self, of our ego, of our Yetzer Horah is the heart. So if it's a battle between our heart and our mind, that's an easy struggle. Our mind has dominance. But once the mind is conflicted, once the mind has been infiltrated, once there are certain, I'm going to use the word casualties, there's a little bit of conquering, there's an inch of space in our mind where the nefesh habahamis, where our ego has control, has dominance, that's a whole, we're already enmeshed with the enemy. We're already, it's a whole different level of struggle. It's a much more ferocious, intense struggle. Okay, so the first kind of Beinoni, the Beinoni we met in chapter 12, that Beinoni's mind is absolutely clear. It's like America having a war hundreds, thousands of miles away. The neshama has absolute clarity. There's no war happening in the mind. The mind has absolute clarity. There's no war happening in the mind. The mind is shooting arrows far away, but the mind itself is absolutely clear of any enemy influence. The animal self does not live in his mind. The animal self has no captured territory, not even an inch of space in the mind, because that's the level of clarity. Most of us, I'm not going to say most of us, I'm going to say in the behaviors that we really struggle with, in the behaviors where we find it so difficult to let our neshama show up. You know why we're having that struggle? It's because our mind is influenced. Our mind is already captured and infiltrated by our nefesh habahamis. Remember, we were talking about this when we talked about trauma, that in our childhood, right, we said that our default setting is our nefesh habahamis. Our default setting is our animal self. It's our ego. So anytime we're not consciously switching on our neshama, our Yetzer Horah, our ego, our nefesh habahamis is in control. So by the time we come to adulthood, by the time we learn these chapters in Tanya and actually learn how to do it, how to use these tools, we have already in the subconscious of our minds, we believe many lies. We believe ideas that are not in alignment with Hashem's truth. We give credence to ideas about our worthlessness, about our utter objectivity. We give credence to the idea of our shame, of our indignity, of the possibility for us losing our respect, our value, our worthiness. We give credence to the possibility of despair, of anxiety, of all the stuff, right? So that's why that's why the struggle with these areas is on a whole different level. I want to just give you a very practical example of what we're talking about here, okay? Let's say I wake up in the morning and I want to stay in bed because I'm tired, okay? But then I remember that I have an appointment. I have an appointment and I have to be on time. And I know that if I don't get up right this second, I will miss that appointment. And I know that I need that appointment and that appointment has to happen. So my heart and really my whole body wants to stay in bed. But my mind has no doubt that I absolutely must get out of bed. What's going to happen? My mind is in charge. So my mind overrides my heart. My mind overrides even my body. And right away, I will get out of bed. That is a perfect example of Mayach Shalat Ahalev, because my mind is the boss of my behavior. I know that I need to get out of bed. So even though I really don't want to, I'm going to do it anyway. But let's take the same scenario and I'm going to tell you what happens what gets in the way of Mayach Shalat Ahalev, okay? I wake up in the morning and same thing. I have an appointment, but I'm really, really tired. I want to stay in bed. And I remember that I have this appointment, but then instead of saying, okay, I must get to the appointment on time and I have absolute clarity about it, I think to myself, 1 minute, actually, you know what? Usually those appointments run late. I'm always waiting for them for half an hour. And it's not really important for me to be on time. They always overschedule. There's no, and if I'm running late, it's never a big deal anyway. So it's fine. Will I still get out of bed? Will I jump out of bed in the way that I did before? Exactly. For sure I won't. I will not. There's no way I will. Why? What changed? Why didn't Mayach Shalat Ahalev work for me? It worked. It worked. Mayach Shalat Ahalev worked actually perfectly. You know why? Because my mind was confused. My mind was not overriding my heart because my mind actually gave me full permission to stay in bed. The rule of Mayach Shalat Halalev means that my mind is the only source of permission for my behavior. So if I have no room for it in my mind, it will not show up in my behavior. And by the same token, if I do have permission for it in my mind, it will absolutely show up in my behavior. So in the first example, it was unthinkable for me to stay in bed, and that's why I didn't. There could only be one result. I was certainly going to get out of bed and make it to my appointment on time because there was no other option. There was no room in my mind to stay in bed. So I didn't. My mind did not give me permission to press the snooze button, so I didn't. But in the second example, there was plenty of room to press the snooze button. There was plenty of room to think about being late. There was a good reason to stay in bed, and therefore, I did stay in bed. There's room for it in my mind. It will come up in my behavior. I will show up with that behavior. And this is the same science with any behavior that we want to change. If you look at any behavior in your life, any behavior that you want to stop, or any behavior that you want to start, and it's something that you keep failing, if you look carefully, you'll notice that it's not a matter of mind over heart. It's a battle of mind over mind. Because when it's a matter of mind over heart, the mind wins. The mind is the boss and the mind always wins. But when our desires start to become how we think, when our desires, when it's mehalev, when it already hijacked, when our desire, when our impulse, when our tendency, when our behavior, when our habit has infiltrated, has parked itself neatly, squarely in our minds, and it could be even in the subconsciousness of our minds, then we don't have absolute clarity about what we're going to do. And that's when we need more help. So Mayach Shalat al Halev is always true. But when part of our mind understands and appreciates the value of stopping or starting a particular behavior, and a different part of our mind says, go ahead and go engage in that behavior, then we're going to do that behavior. It's like you have a red light and a green light. If you're driving a car and you see both a red light and green light flashing at the same time, you go. You look and then you go because you know the light is broken. You could ignore it. The system doesn't work anymore. You're just going to go with whatever you want to do. Part of our mind says, I am the boss. I don't let you stay in bed. It's unthinkable. But part of our mind is saying, go ahead, stay in bed as long as you need to. It's no problem. You'll get by just fine. And in that case, we will probably stay in bed. It's like a little kid asking you for a lollipop, right? You know, and you say no, but then you give them a lollipop. What are they? You're saying, no, I don't let you have a lollipop, but your hand is holding a lollipop. What's the kid going to do? The kid will take the lollipop and run away. You're saying no, but you're giving it to them. And that's what our minds do to us. Our conscious self is saying no, but subconsciously, a little part of us somewhere in our system is saying it's actually normal to scream right now. It's actually normal to dig into despair and park there for a few hours. It's actually normal to sit down and eat a tub of ice cream right now, right here. Okay, so our conscious mind says one thing, but our subconscious mind, or maybe even our conscious mind, says something opposite. Our heart asks us permission to be the same that we were yesterday, to be comfortable at all costs, right? And sometimes we know that we need a change, but sometimes we don't, right? Sometimes we know that we must move, that we must do something different from what we did yesterday. And when we have that absolute clarity, Mayach Shalat al Halev, our mind says yes. You know, our mind says no, this is what I'm giving you permission to do. This is what I'm not giving you permission to do. When our mind is absolutely clear, deep down, even within our subconscious, we get rid of all the clutter, the parts of us that are denying that, our behavior will follow. But sometimes we are mixed up. And I could relate to this when it comes to many different behaviors in my own life. And I'm sure you have behaviors that you're trying to change, and they're so difficult to change. What's going on in those behaviors is a part of your brain is saying, no way, no how, not here, not now. But while we're saying all of that with one part of our mind, a different part of our mind is giving full-fledged permission, credence to engage in exactly that behavior. So it's not just that there's a dispute between our mind and our heart, there's a dispute between our mind and our mind, between our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. It's all in our mind. Okay, I want to open up for questions because we cannot I don't think we could do the answer to this of what is the tool that the Baal Tanya gives us before we have understanding. That's a very good question, and I think we all relate to that experience. I certainly do. That's because our Yetzer Horah is hard at work, distracting. Our Yetzer Horah knows how important it is for us to daven, and so it's a battle. In the Zohar, it tells us that Yaakov Avinu called davening a time of battle because the intensity of concentration was that intense. You know, there's a joke. My husband once told me, he said, a guy comes to a rabbi and he says, Rabbi, I'm having a court case with this Gentile neighbor, with my not Jewish neighbor, and we're going for mediation, and this is the problem. And what do you think I should say? And the rabbi tells him what he thinks he should say. And the guy says, okay, but if I say that, he's probably going to say this. What should I say then? And the rabbi says, okay, if he says that, then say this. And then the Jew is like, okay, oh, fine. But if I say this, he's probably going to say that. And the rabbi says, okay, so then go ahead. And, you know, he took him to the next level of what he should say if his neighbor says that. And finally, you know, he asks him again. And then the rabbi says, stop. Your neighbor is not Jewish. He doesn't daven Shemona Esrei. He doesn't have time to plan so much of this conversation. You don't have to worry. You know, he's not taking it so far. Okay, he doesn't have time to think so much like you do. And it's a joke. I killed it in the way I just said it. But the point is that, you know, he was saying that because this person doesn't daven Shemona Esrei, he doesn't have time to think. Our greatest ideas come during davening. Our most important plans we make during davening. That's my experience of davening. So my question is, how does, you know, in chapter 12, we learn that the Nefesh HaBahamis is not bothering us during davening. That's my question. Maybe the answer is that what we're talking about in chapter 12 is after a certain point of clarity, you know, you get into the zone, you know, then the Yetzer Horah is not bothering you anymore. But my personal experience of davening is that it's a very difficult battle to stay on track and to stay on focus and to keep our mind coming back. And the way to do that is really not to be angry at ourselves for having distracting thoughts and not to beat ourselves up about it, not to hate ourselves for it, but to just gently keep bringing our mind back to the words of the Siddur. Someone just shared a beautiful visual of that Shabbos lamp where it's plugged in and it has an opening for the lamp to shine through, and it's a beautiful bright light, but it's created to be a Shabbos light. So when you turn it on top, it basically has a shade that a safe shade that covers the light. And when you turn it and the shade is obscuring the light, it's covering that light, it's completely dark and it doesn't shine at all. And so this is a really good visual for the fact that, like, you know, the light is plugged in. It's absolutely shining forth. But sometimes there's an obstruction to that light from, it doesn't, you know, there's a layer of that conceals the light from shining forth. And what someone just shared so beautifully is that's a beautiful visual for our own light that we carry within it. We're always plugged in. The light is always glowing. The light is always shining bright. It's just that sometimes there are obstructions to the light, and we can't experience it, and we're not able to, or we're not letting it show up in our behavior because there's something obstructing it. But it's never ever disconnected and never not there. Thank you for sharing that. There's really two questions that you're asking here: is what's the science of what's going on? And then what should you do about it? You're not asking what you should do about it. And maybe next week we'll talk about what we should do about it. But I wanna connect what you're saying to the science of what's going on. What you just said is that I want to forgive somebody, but I'm not ready. Okay. The minute I say I'm not ready, and I'm giving credence to that idea, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't, there's no judgment here. Okay. Because I have the same experience in many different behaviors. Okay. The minute I say, I want to do this, but I'm not ready to do it, that's why I'm not doing it, because I decided that I'm not ready. I have this idea in my mind that's getting in my way, and I'm giving credence to that. I'm saying I'm not ready. And this is, again, this is not a judgment here. Next week, I don't think we're going to get into the actual tool today, because I want to do it thoroughly. I want to do it right. It's in the notes, so you can get a head start on it. But I feel like it's so important to recognize and embrace and be honest with ourselves about the challenge. When I say, I want to forgive that person, but there's something that doesn't let me, right? Inherent in that statement is that in every question has a statement, right? So in that, I'm not even asking a question. I'm saying I want to, but I can't. It's impossible. I'm seeing their behavior as a blockage. I'm seeing their behavior as an obstacle. And maybe on some level it is. Certainly on a human level, it is an obstacle. And the whole world will agree with you that it is an obstacle and it is impossible. So, but let's just recognize that that's the science. There's a part of my mind that says, hello, that maybe is, wagging its finger and saying, you're supposed to forgive, you're supposed to be. And then there's another part of my mind that's like, actually, no, there's no way I could forgive this. There's no way I could let go of this resentment. There's absolutely no way I can do this. I don't want you to use this as a judgment. I in my own experience and in working with other people, I find that when people judge themselves and say, you really shouldn't be feeling this way, it's only counterproductive. It doesn't help. At the same time, if you want to be liberated from that person, the only way to liberate ourselves, forgiveness is part of that process of liberating ourselves from that person. If you want to be free, Rabbi Twersky said this so brilliantly. He said, and I don't know if it's his own line or if he was quoting it from somewhere else. He said, resentment is allowing your enemy to live in your heart rent free. For as long as you're holding on to the resentment, you're letting yourself, you're letting that enemy, that person who hurt you, that unhealthy person live in you without even paying you any rent. So resentment hurts ourselves. So of course, we want to let go of the resentment. And of course, we don't want to propagate or perpetuate or enable the other person's unhealthy behavior, hurtful behavior, not even in the slightest. We don't want to condone it. We don't want to make it okay. We don't want to validate it. We just want to be free. We want to be free to serve Hashem with joy in this moment. So from that perspective, yeah, it would be healthy to be able to let go. The question is how? How do I go about it if I'm really feeling that I'm not ready? And that we're going to talk about next week. Wow, that's so beautiful. Someone is sharing that what helps her forgive is recognizing that just like she wants Hashem to forgive, Hashem could forgive, and Hashem does forgive. And she has a part of Hashem within her, and with that, she's able to forgive and to show up with love and compassion, even though she was hurt. Thank you. That was so beautiful. You're asking about resentment, and I see that this is a lot on people's minds, because I guess that's where we left off last week. And I'm happy about it. It's cool, because I actually never thought about these. I always think about chapters 12 and 13 as like, okay, the Baal Tanya's step-by-step guide for letting go of any undesired behavior. But actually, resentment and holding grudges is also an undesired behavior. So, okay, so I understand how, I'm repeating the question is, and tell me if I get it right or wrong. I understand that everything happens between me and Hashem, and Hashem is my only power. But how do I wrap my head around? Where do I put this peace in the puzzle that Hashem actually used this other person as a tool to bring me pain, as a delivery boy of pain. So to me, the answer is, and I know this is a lot of work, but the Baal Tanya compares it to Yosef HaTzadik. And he says, and the Zohar tells us that we should learn from Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef HaTzadik experienced tremendous suffering and pain and devastating loss, actually. You know, he lost his whole childhood and his home life and his whole stability. And yet, and there were a couple of messengers. It wasn't just one person. It was all of his brothers that ganged up on him. And he told them, it's not about you. It's not about you. In other words, he said, it's not about you, it's from Hashem. So like, where do we put that? If I get a envelope in the mail, you know, the envelope has devastating news. You know, the envelope is carrying a letter that's very, very painful, such terrible words. No person should ever have to hear such words. I'm upset about the words, but the mailman is just delivering his mail. It's like he's inconsequential. He's not even in the picture. He's got nothing on me. There's no energy between me and the mailman. It's the letter that counts. It's the words, it's the message in that letter that makes all the difference. So that's the visual that I try to keep in mind, you know, that it's the letter. It's you know, and if we have the strength to see that everything that happens from Hashem is good, then we actually want to thank the mailman. You know, you're the one who delivered me the $1 million lottery ticket. Whoa, you know, but that's a really developed stage of, you know, that's a really evolved stage of awareness of Hashem and letting go of so much clutter. And many of us, I don't want anyone to walk away feeling less than respectable or less than good enough if we're not holding at that place in this moment. Is forgiveness for us or for the person that hurt us? I think it's for both, but it's certainly for us. Okay, so let's wrap up. Where are we with the Beinoni here and now? Okay, chapter 12, we talked about, you know, if there's no room for our mind, in our mind, there will be no room in our behavior. And today I hope everyone walks away with these two ideas. Number one, to realize that our Yetzer Horah is a judge. It's going to feel very authoritative. It's going to feel very compelling. It's going to feel very forceful. And when it does, know that this is the moment that the Baal Tanya was preparing us for. This is the moment of choice. It's not a moment of surrender. It's a moment of choice. And we make that choice by recognizing that despite the feeling of overwhelm in the face of this very authoritative, compelling, forceful voice or tendency or leaning or pull inside of me, it's not my king. I do not have to surrender. I don't have to act on it. I am free to make a choice of exactly what I will think about, what I will say, and what I will do. That's the first thing we learned today. And the second thing we learned today is that whenever we're having a hard time engaging in our better, in like showing up as our better self, showing up as a carrier of Hashem's light, with that light shining forth in its full glory, dominating our behavior, if we look carefully into our mind, we will find somewhere within ourselves, there's a belief that is contradicting our desired behavior. And we might not find that belief right away. We might not find that, we might not find it, but we're going to talk about that next week. Thank you. So next week, Be'ezus Hashem, what we're going to do is like, okay, we'll move into a solution here. Okay, so what do we do when our mind is conflicted? What do we do when our part of our mind is saying yes and a part of our mind is saying no? How do we move forward through that? I'm really excited about it and looking forward to it.